President Trump was left by himself far too long over the holiday weekend, as evidenced by his absolutely unhinged postings on social media. On the bright side, it's a preview of his arguments for the coming year, so it's worth breaking down. The Michigan Supreme Court sidestepped a case about Trump's eligibility for the ballot, and the U.S. Supreme Court denied Jack Smith's request to fast-track a pivotal legal debate in the federal trial. It's beginning to look like Trump might have a real chance of making it to the election before he gets convicted of something. The first year of a second Trump administration are coming into focus, and it's, of course, totally terrifying. We want to help you make the case against this insanity. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who vote for progress in every election and want to convince their conservative friends and family members to join a majority. This is Majority 54.
All right, Jason, fill me in. What's going on here with our favorite congresswoman from Colorado?
Yeah, the Boebert, this news really dropped just as we were coming on here. So she's announced that she is switching congressional districts. I believe she's going from the 4th to the 3rd, or from the 3rd to the 4th. One of those. But what's interesting is in some parts of this, she's going from the 3rd to the 4th. In some parts of this district, including where she lives, there's like 3 districts between her and this one that she's going to represent. And she's been pretty transparent about the fact, it appears, that she just doesn't have as good of a chance of winning in the 3rd. As some will remember, Adam Frisch lost to her by a little over 500 votes last time. In fact, it looked like he was ahead, and then there was a recount. And he was running again. He is running again. I think she came to the conclusion she was going to lose. Now, the 4th district is much more Republican, so it will be represented by a Republican, but there is a clown car of Republicans wanting to run in it already. We'll see if this changes that. Look, I don't know. I'll just
she's
stop
not
there.
planning to move. Is that
No.
right? Wow.
A lot of states, I don't know, how it is in New York. In Missouri, you just got to be a resident of the state. You don't have to be a resident of the district.
Yeah, that is true of New York too. Yeah.
Now,
it's just rare that it ever happens.
Right,
Yeah.
Because it's weird. It's, I would say, frowned upon. It is going to be an issue in the primary. I mean, it's just you have to imagine that she has the advantage in the primary just based on name recognition. Although one of the people running is a state senator who probably has some decent name recognition. But when you think about Republican primary voters, they're pretty partisan. A lot of them probably really like Lauren Boebert. But I don't know. The whole "she just wants to use you, doesn't really want to represent you" thing is frequently a pretty effective argument, particularly when it's a choice between people who will ultimately all vote pretty much the same. I'm
not holding my breath that authenticity is going to win the day in a MAGA primary.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Look, here's on the bright side. Lauren Boebert, one of the most extreme members of Congress, has decided that the way the election is shaping up, she's likely to lose it if she has to run in a competitive race against a Democrat. Now, that district is still plus Republican by a few points. I mean, it leans Republican, but she thinks she's going to lose. I think that has to be taken as somewhat encouraging when it comes to what her read of the political environment is.
Yeah. I wouldn't put it past her to win. I mean, that primary electorate is so distant from any calculus that you and I could generate here.
Yeah.
Like what they're looking for, who knows? I mean, all the crazy stuff she's done in another district probably benefit her. And it's not even like she faced any significant primary challenge in her former district. It was the general election that was the big problem.
And that's what I'm saying. I think that's a reason. We're about to go through a lot of things in this episode that are going to make people not feel particularly great. And so just the fact that that Lauren Boebert looks at the situation and says, I would prefer to run in a competitive primary against a bunch of other people as opposed in a district I don't live in, as opposed to running for re-election as the incumbent member of Congress in a district that's already elected me twice. That seems like a good sign for team democracy.
Yeah. Well, okay. Should we talk about Christmas?
I mean, speaking of things that are not team democracy, let's talk about Trump on Christmas.
So he went online on Christmas Eve and Christmas, and he spread his message. Every politician puts out the bromides and this time of year. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everybody. It's always a parlor game to see, like, how much is this politician going to mention Christmas itself? Are they just going to say Happy Holidays? Is this going to lead to a war on Christmas accusation? Trump, I think, took a different tact. I'll read for you what he said, and most of this is actually all caps, which longtime listeners will know. Depending on my mood, I can't really get into that kind of thing. I'm also in a very echoey office, so I'm going to be a little bit more subdued when I read this. But he said, they spied on my, this is, by the way, I want to reiterate, this is the holiday message from Trump. They spied on my campaign, lied to Congress, cheated on FISA, which it's like cheated on the SAT or something, rigged a presidential election, allowed millions of people, comma, that's its own clause, allowed millions of people, many from prisons and mental institutions. Okay, so it's a complex addition. We needed
like a positive situation. Yeah.
To invade our country, screwed up in Afghanistan, and Joe Biden's misfits and thugs like deranged Jack Smith are coming after me at all levels of persecution never seen before in our country. 3 question marks. It's called election interference. Merry Christmas! ! Now there's more, but I want to pause there because I do think, as we would say in the education world, let's close read this. There's a lot of text here to digest. What stands out to you, Jason?
Well, one, it's all about him.
Yes.
It's certainly not about the baby Jesus.
Surprise.
Yeah.
It's not about Jesus. It's not about Santa Claus. Not about the children. Not about uniting our country. Yeah.
It's not about anybody else. It's like, they're coming after me. Now, we know that the implicit message for Trump is always, if they can come after me, they can come after you. But this is like
a good message.
All caps.
If we're ranking effective messages, that's a very effective framing.
Yeah, it is. It is. I would just, a sidebar, what this made me think about is you were mentioning how politicians are always sending these out on holidays. It took, after I stopped running for things, it took 3 or 4 years for me to break the habit of feeling to no longer feel the urge on like major holidays to put out some sort of, tweet about it. And now it's just great. I just like say nothing, or I say something ridiculous, and not quite this ridiculous.
I noticed this the other day. I got a message from Mount Sinai Hospital on Christmas or something saying, and I'm like, what staff member has to stick around and write this dumb message that nobody cares about? It's like every organization I'm on the board of, I started writing back being like, what does this serve? Like, it's just an opportunity to unsubscribe from your email list. Like, nobody cares. If you're going to write personal messages, go for it. But it's like, let's end the generic holiday message. And in that sense, this is anything but generic.
Yeah, that's true. Trump has definitely done that. I don't know what else sticks out to you about it. I mean, the big thing for me is that, what I would say to people about it, if I were using this as evidence, I would just be like, look, everything he says is about him. It's none of it's about us.
Everything is about him. He certainly has never met a period or a semicolon. The other thing is, did you see this Rogan clip? I should have teed this up. Have you seen this Rogan clip on the internet where Rogan is talking to some MMA fighter, and they're talking about how old Biden is and he's unfit for office and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, did you see this clip? And they're talking about like some speech Biden allegedly made about the Revolutionary War, where he said one of the reasons why XYZ didn't happen is because there weren't enough airports. And they're like, oh, that's disqualifying. And then they tee up the clip, and whoever this producer is tees up the clip, and it's of Biden making fun of Trump for the very thing that Rogan and this guy said was disqualifying. And then they still don't realize what's going on. And then the producer, to his credit, is like, no. Trump actually said the thing that you said is disqualifying. And then they played the clip of Trump saying the thing. And then Rogan and this MMA fighter just kind of were like silent. And they're like, oh, that's inconvenient. That's what makes me think of this. Is like, if Biden said something like this, and I think Salty's loading this up. So when he lets us know he'll have it, I think it's worth playing for our audience, because this is the kind of thing that people are talking about. It's like, Rogan, I think, plays this sort of part of this guy who's independent, and he says he likes Bernie, he says he likes Michelle Obama, but unquestionably the stuff that he's putting on his podcast is pro-Trump, anti-Biden right now. And I think this is a moment where he defrocked himself.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. I mean, if Salty has it, I guess we have the benefit. He says, "Give me
It
2
needs a couple minutes. No
Well, let's
problem.
go.
Let's talk about the next Trump
Yeah.
missive.
So he said that he then says, included also are world leaders, which is capitalized, both good and bad, but none of which are as evil and sick, which has like those, what do you call those? Like
This single quotation,
single
like
quotes.
the end quote, like the one that you use when you're trying to say that you're quoting somebody and they're quoting something.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
little single ones.
As the thugs, all cap, we have inside of our country, which is capitalized, who within their open borders also capitalized, inflation, all caps, Afghanistan surrender, green new scam, high taxes, new energy independence, woke military. All these are capitalized, by the way. Russian, Ukraine, Israel,
Now he's just
Iran.
at the end. He's just listing issues. Russia
Yeah,
/
all
Ukraine,
electric
Israel /
car lunacy and so much more are looking to destroy our once great USA. May they rot in hell again. Merry Christmas. It's actually I
again.
think
Merry
like
Christmas.
Trump does get credit for his comedic timing. It's like there is a version of it that like the again Merry Christmas. It's like
Yeah, but it's like
impeccable.
comedic timing. It's comedic timing where it's like a self-parody.
Yes.
But okay, it's like he's doing Alec Baldwin doing him.
Yes.
Okay, so with these, what I always try to do is I try and find little previews of message pivots here, and in order to make them valuable, right?
Yes.
And the two biggest, or at least things he's going to emphasize, the two biggest that I see here are, one, he put inflation in all caps, which means even though inflation is going down, he's definitely hanging on to the idea that he can continue to talk this into being an issue.
Right.
And then the other one that's really interesting to me is it's the first time I've heard the term. Maybe he's been using it, but Afghanistan surrender.
Yes.
As you know, like I would certainly not call myself a fan of the way Biden has handled the Afghanistan issue, but I say that recognizing that he has handled the Afghanistan issue roughly 1,000 times better than a Trump administration would have. Like, I'm very aware of that. But also, it's total revisionist history. I mean, to just be like Afghanistan surrender, like it appears this is going to be a thing they start saying, and people should know that Trump's plan, after he negotiated with the Taliban like face to face and went to them and did all of that, was one, he's the one who like let all of them out of prison, and then two, he was going to withdraw in May of 2021. And then Biden came in, and Biden wanted to get out as much as anybody, and Biden was like, we can't do it that early, and he pushed the deadline back by 3 months, and so 4 months, three months. Yeah. So the idea that he's going to call it the Afghanistan surrender, when like Biden was like, no, we're waiting 3 more months to pull out of the country, as opposed to Trump's plan. So that's one I think to be on the lookout for.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in here, and we'll get to this later on in the episode. Like, he's tucking into his insanity actually effective policy arguments that, whether you agree or disagree with the substance of it, there are key constituencies that are animated by this, right? So if you look at any of these interviews that happen in Iowa, for example, people like Trump's tariffs in the heartland of America. They also hate the sort of immigration quagmire that we're in right now. Key, even union constituencies of Democrats, as we've talked about, hate the electric car subsidies and blame them in part for some of the labor woes that we have in this country and some of the issues around costs in the manufacturing of cars. So you go through all this, and then I think there's a sense of quote unquote global chaos with what's happening in Ukraine and Israel, and the GOP seizes on this kind of stuff and says, oh, look, the world is out of control because Biden is weak, right? That's the arguments they make. Now, we could spend all episode poking holes substantively in all these things, and we have over the course of this podcast, but those arguments, each one of them actually is fairly effective with certain subgroups of the population that Democrats have taken for granted before. And so I think that matters.
And I think, and just to tee up this Rogan clip, I think the subgroup that we should really think about when we think about where this kind of stuff is effective are persuadable voters. And there's a very large chunk of persuadable voters who are really just low information voters, which is not to say they just don't know as much. I mean, I guess maybe, but it's not as unkind as that. It is just people who they are going about their lives. They have jobs that are taxing. They have families. They have things that are going on. And these are folks who sometimes they vote for Republicans. Sometimes they vote for Democrats. They may be very far left or very far right. They're not necessarily in the middle, but what they are people who are going to, with about a month, maybe 6 weeks to go in the election, they're going to start really paying attention and making up their minds. And so what he's doing here is he is sort of prepping the battlefield for that. And the key to winning folks like that over is just what you said. It's not necessarily, in many cases, to propose really realistic solutions. It's to tap into what is causing them anxiety, into what they're afraid of.
Yeah,
and that's what he's doing.
Yeah, and I think what they're banking on is that Trump's unhingedness is a wash to Biden's age and lack of coherence. And so that the voters penalize both of them equally for those two things. And that the tiebreaker is some combination of novelty, right? Which, even though we had Trump as a president, they're counting on the fact that Americans have short attention spans and they just always like change. And second, a sense of disillusionment and division within the Democratic Party. And honestly, that is not a bad bet. If that's their strategy, that's I'm not saying it's guaranteed to succeed, but it certainly is maximizing the really crappy hand that they have.
I'd add a third, which is affinity group, meaning if you're a white male in particular, but really a white person in this country, and you're not exactly sure what you think about the issues, and you feel like the world is in crisis, and here's Trump saying, I'm like you, and I'm all about the things that you're about, and and you're confused by pronouns, and I'm telling you pronouns are dumb, whatever it is. And I mean, look, you got a better shot at it if your friends are also listening to Rogan, and that's the reason, I think, to play this Rogan clip, to get a sense for what these conversations might be like.
Well, there's people that voted for Biden that are doing it now. They're like, what did I do?
Right.
What did I choose? How is this guy?
Yeah, you just can't listen to an interview where he's saying some of the stuff he says that just makes no sense at all. It's like you can't listen to those interviews and feel like you made a good decision. I don't know how you could.
Did you hear what he said yesterday or a couple of days ago? He's talking about the Revolutionary War. He's like, one of the reasons why we lost the Revolutionary War, one of the problems with the Revolutionary War was they didn't have enough airports. Yeah. Have you seen that?
I saw that. What the hell?
Pull him.
It's crazy.
If you had any other job and you were talking like that, they would go, hey, you're done.
If you talk like that to a doctor at your medical exam to fight, they'd be like, okay, obviously you're not fighting. You would also, here's 8 weeks of being helped out by a professional.
Right. You might not ever do anything again.
No, it's one of the wildest things ever.
It's insane.
Yeah.
And the media gaslighting you to protect. It's just people are so afraid of Trump being in office and Republicans being in office.
A few moments later.
Hanging out with the guy, I'm like, man.
Well, it's just the media narrative. I mean, so many people were fed this lie that the Russia collusion.
Yeah.
Was
this the video you're talking about?
Let me see what this one says. I don't think it is.
What? By the way, the same stable genius that said the biggest problem we had in the Revolutionary War is we didn't have enough airports. Whoa.
Yeah, that's it.
Whoa.
All right, just,
What?
Just for the record,
Is that fake?
it's not fake, but he was referencing Trump saying that. Here's what Trump saying it in 2019.
Oh.
Donald Trump said something about that. He didn't say Jesus. He said a stable genius, and that's where the transcription.
Let me hear what it says. What did he say?
In June of 1775, the Continental Congress created a unified army out of the revolutionary forces encamped around Boston and New York, and named after the great George Washington, Commander-in-Chief. The Continental Army suffered a bitter winter of Valley Forge, found glory across the waters of the Delaware, and seized victory from Cornwallis of Yorktown. Our army manned the airport. It ran the ramparts. It took over the airports. It did everything it had to do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So he fucked up.
Yeah, he did. But I feel like
Took over
that's
the airport.
you can tell too. It sounds like a little different. He's like, you can tell he like messed up his words, but
Yeah.
He was just, I don't know.
Took over the airport.
Well, that's the thing about media these days. It's like
right.
You
never
got to
know.
look into it.
Okay, I love.
Okay, there's
so
a
much
lot
of
to
this
talk
I love.
about here.
Yeah, like the ending of like,
Yeah,
What can you do? It's
they
the
went from
media.
being like,
It's like,
let's
you're the media.
pull, let's pull the president to, okay, yeah, he fucked up.
and then they're like, well, clearly he misspoke, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, no, actually, what happened is he confronted the word rampart and went, I don't know what that is. It must
he
be
was
an
clearly
airport.
he's clearly reading off of a. Yeah, that's a good point. By
But
the
then
way.
he ad-libbed to airport. He was like, I
Right.
don't know what a rampart is. It must be a misprint. So he ad-libbed to airport. I think my favorite part of this clip is when the MMA fighter says, if you said that in a pre-fight physical, they wouldn't let you fight. I'm sorry. I think that if you said in a pre-fight physical that you think that the airplane was invented in the 1700s, they'd still let you fight.
Right.
I think they'd be like, this guy probably doesn't know when the airplane was invented, which is probably why he fights for a living. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, what's obvious is that there's this narrative. I've talked about this a lot on this podcast of the mainstream media and the evils of the mainstream media that are feeding the audience this poison. And these people like Rogan, they need to believe that there's this big bad media out there because it's how they look themselves in the mirror and say, this is why I do what I do. But what they've failed to own up to is that they're bigger than any mainstream media platform. And so when they go on and they misinform their audience, like they would have done if their producer didn't step in just there, and that they still did, by the way, like any sympathetic Rogan listener to that is going to come away saying, oh, like the message still is Biden is the one who's senile. There's a tepid correction at the end of it, right? Like they failed to own up to their own like sense of power. Like they're the most powerful people in media right now. And yes, it's an improvement. And Rogan did this under pressure. He added this fact checking because he was pressured to at various points. But they're still wrong and they're still arrogant and they're still incredibly biased in ways that you don't even see in some of the worst mainstream media outlets.
It goes back to the word that Stephen Colbert invented during the Bush administration, which is truthiness. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to feel true.
Right. Right.
So.
Well, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to do a special edition of Trump Legal. There's a lot going on there. And then we're going to dive into Trump's plans for 2024. Some great reporting out of the New York Times. All of this and more when we come back. Real talk. 52% of men over 40 experience some form of ED between the ages of 40 and 70. But it's always been a taboo topic. But thankfully, HIMSS is changing that by providing affordable access to ED treatment all online. And HIMSS is changing men's healthcare by providing access to affordable and discreet sexual health treatments, all from the comfort of your couch. And HIMSS provide access to clinically proven generic alternatives to Viagra and Cialis up to 95% cheaper with options as low as $2 per dose. The process is simple and 100% online. No uncomfortable doctor visits. Answer a series of questions on their site and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. And if prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free and discreet packaging. No insurance is needed. You can pay one low price for your treatments, online visits, ongoing shipments, and provider messaging. And Hims has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers. So if ED is getting you down, it's time to change that. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/majority. That's HIMS.com/majority for your personalized ED treatment options. HIMS.com/majority. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply, and see website for details and important safety information. Subscriptions are required. Price varies based on the product and the subscription plan. If you're a long-time listener to this podcast, you know I've been drinking AG1 for many years, well before we've ever partnered for this podcast. And when I started drinking AG1, I noticed dramatic improvements in my energy, in my health. And what I love about it is it does so much. It does a lot for your gut optimization, your stress management, immune support. And since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition by continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your health. And I didn't just replace my multivitamin with AG1. I love that every scoop includes prebiotics, probiotics, digestive enzymes for gut support, magnesium and B vitamins for energy support, adaptogens to balance my body's stress level, vitamin C and zinc to help support my immune health. And I recommend AG1 to all my friends and family because it's backed by the latest science, and they maintain super high quality standards. So I've noticed so much of a difference both in my life and those of people around me. And if you want to join us and take ownership over your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/majority. That's drinkag1.com/majority to check it out.
All right, Ravi. Before we go into the Trump legal stuff, there's a thing where I'm not sure whether you and I will agree on this. I think I have a contrarian view, but over the last few days, a new sort of approach has started to be used against Trump. And we've seen some of these ads. They're mostly online ads. They come from folks like the Lincoln Project, and they are built around the idea that Trump smells bad. And I guess a couple of people gave interviews where they said that, he had body odor.
Adam Kinzinger. Yeah.
Okay. Kinzinger, I think, said that. Yeah. Which is fine. I mean, maybe the man doesn't smell good. I am at a loss to figure out why this is a good idea that is not going to backfire, but I'm open to being convinced.
The backfiring, I have a hard time believing. I think one could argue it's just a waste of time, but I actually think there's an outside chance that on the margins, it's important in the sense that there's all this data and scholarship around whenever authoritarian regimes try to gin up hatred towards a people, they try to commingle disgust with the idea of a given person or people, right? And this is done with, usually with evil intentions, right? And I'm a big believer that people on the sort of quote unquote good side should do what they can to deploy some psychology here. And I think the idea that you mix people's perception of Trump with a visceral feeling of disgust, which is that he smells bad, I think is psychologically potentially very persuasive. But beyond that, I think it does two things. One is it's a little bit of a step in the direction of he's an old smelly person, which is always good. But two is it will absolutely drive him crazy. Because it's Kinzinger, so there's probably some truth to it. And if you think about the mechanics of being Trump, the idea that he would smell bad makes some sense to me. I mean, let's be honest, no offense to our audience, there's a greater risk with every decade you live that you just smell worse. It's just, I mean, there's kind of like a curve. It's I forget what you call it.
When you're a teenager, it peaks at teenage years, I think.
Undoubtedly you smell the worst if you're a 16-year-old boy. Then you kind of get your hygiene in control, and then you start smelling worse. I mean, it's one of the reasons why adult diapers now sell greater than kids' diapers in most countries around the world. So I've now dug myself an absolutely massive hole here, but all I'm saying is it's enough. If there's enough upside with very little downside, especially it's not like Biden's going to be making that argument. Although the idea of him on the debate stage, if it gets really messy, just turning to him and being look, your own Republican colleagues say you stink. Trump's reactions to that would be honestly worth whatever harm comes from it.
Okay, here's why I don't like it. One, I don't see much utility anymore in trying to drive him crazy because I think it's such a short drive. I think he's already there,
Right.
and I don't think like I don't I think in 2020 there was some truth to that. In okay, but now the other thing I worry about is, look, Trump has become very deft at taking everything that is said about him and turning it into something that is said about his voters, and I worry about this becoming like a meme of the elitist liberal class doing the ultimate "they're a basket of deplorables" statement where they all smell bad. And
this is a hard one because most people won't like. People would be like, "Yeah, I'm like politically incorrect or whatever," but most people aren't going to lean into the "I smell bad" thing. It's also alliterative,
but it
in a
sounds like a class argument.
But are you familiar with the Diaper Don moniker, which I think is worth it alone? Like the Diaper Don
kind
is
of
such a good name. I just
we are really elevating. I brought this up, but we're really elevating the discussion.
So,
here,
audience,
man.
if you're gonna get mad at me, like generally speaking, I try to think through my.
Let's
really
be real,
crazy
Ravi.
take.
They're gonna get mad at me. Our audience is full of liberal people who just want to see ads of him about him being, smelling bad.
Wait, okay, so Salty saying the Trump spokesperson responded. If Salty could throw that up on the screen, maybe, or in the chat, there it is.
Fires back at claims that the ex-president smells.
Okay.
Yeah, they just said that. Okay, well, I don't know what they said. I'm sure they just said it's not true, and he smells like a rose. All right, let's get into his legal fights.
I support it. For the record. I think it's worth it.
We can take no official majority 54 position on this because we're split.
Yes. Okay. Split decision. So, not so good on the. If we have the soundtrack, it's Trump legal, right? I don't know if we have the
nice.
So, I lived for that, really. So generally bad news on the Trump legal front this week. This is what we would say is Act 2, right? The Act 3 is when hopefully the good news comes, but the challenge comes now. Michigan's highest court said Wednesday that Trump can appear on the state's Republican primary ballot, but they declined to weigh in on whether Trump is eligible to run the general election. And similar challenges are proceeding all across the country, and my sense is some will succeed, some will fail, and the Supreme Court will be the final decider on this. And this is a complicated one, Jason. You were a Secretary of State. You probably can make heads or tails of this. I think people are saying that this might be an anomaly.
Sorry. We got to go back. Salty just put up the spokesperson's comment. I have to interrupt this for this. The spokesperson said Adam Kinzinger farted on live TV and is an unemployed fraud. He has disgraced his country and disrespects everyone around him because he is a sad individual who is mad about how his... Okay, no denial about Trump's odor there. I got to be real. Yeah. They just lashed out the other way. All right, anyway, back to Trump legal.
But I just want to point out that the official spokesperson of the frontrunner for the GOP nomination fires back at an accusation that he smells by saying you farted on TV. This is where we are in 2023. All I want to know is, like, when I'm living in a bunker somewhere and people who listen to this podcast are questioning my life choices, I want you to remember this moment when I'm like in full blown in the mountains plotting the revolution. I just want people to remember this one moment and say, I told you so. The disintegration of our society was well underway when those plans were happening. Back to Michigan.
Also, hold on, not to parse things, but are we to believe that Donald Trump has never farted while on live TV? But they forgot the word. I assume they forgot the word audibly, because I've done a lot of live TV. I am certain I have farted while on live TV. I've never audibly farted, so I don't really know I don't even know what this argument is. I mean, frankly, with all the live TV Donald Trump has done, if he has not farted, he needs to see a gastroenterologist because he has a problem. But anyway, all right,
listeners, just so you know, just to peek behind the curtains, this is what happens when we record late, off schedule, and on vacation. So that's what happens. And after you've had it, we'll get to it, I'm sure. We've had
in a week with very little news.
With very little news. But okay, one piece of news, and explain this. Former Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, you know how this stuff works. this was a 4-3 Democratic majority, which I think surprised some people that they declined to weigh in. How do you read this?
Well, okay. So first of all, in a case like this, I haven't looked at the pleadings, but I assume that they had to sue the Secretary of State in the first place. That's the defendant, and it's because I believe Jocelyn Benson took the position of, I, as Secretary of State, am not empowered under Michigan law to disqualify someone from the ballot.
Correct.
And then somebody sued to say, no, you are empowered, and that's important because that's a very different issue that this court was asked to decide than, say, in Colorado. They were asked to decide the legal issue of whether or not the Secretary of State was refusing to exercise a power granted to her, which would be to disqualify him from the ballot. And what they ultimately concluded was that she was correct, that the way that the statute is set up, now they weren't interpreting the U.S. Constitution the way we talked about it last week. They were interpreting state statutes in Michigan and how it empowers the Michigan Secretary of State. And what they concluded is that it is largely a ceremonial role to place people on the ballot, that the Secretary of State administers the election, and they are not statutorily empowered in the state of Michigan to decide who can be on the ballot. Which is why, yes, to some extent they punted, but it is why when we say that they decided that this has to do with the primary ballot, but it doesn't ultimately decide this issue for the general election, is true, because I am sure somebody is going to sue rather than on that point, just to say he shouldn't be allowed on the general election ballot because, under the U.S. Constitution, because he committed insurrection against the United States. So it's sort of a to be continued.
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court is going to have to weigh in on this.
Yeah.
And, we've talked about this before. I'm in no way optimistic that they're going to rule in a way that's going to make our audience happy. But the Supreme Court also decided, we speculated on this last week. They decided that
the
they're
U.S.
not
Supreme Court now.
The U.S. Supreme Court, that they're not going to fast track the immunity question. So, simultaneously, I think they are going to take up the question about whether Trump should appear on ballots, but they're not going to weigh in on the immunity question until the D.C. Court of Appeals decides, and they're going to be in a matter of weeks going to be at least hearing that case. But it usually takes a while for a decision to come. A lot of people are saying this could potentially delay that particular case until after the election, or at least very close to the election.
Yeah. And so, okay. Here's why that matters, is because we have this idea in our mind that the DOJ is independent and from the White House. And what we forget is that that's not in the law anywhere. That's just a norm that we've all established. Right. And so Donald Trump absolutely can, like we've all wondered, can he pardon himself? Well, he can do more than that. He can get into office. He can decide, he can pick an attorney general who doesn't believe that the DOJ is independent. He can do, and we're going to get into this in a minute, all the things he says he's going to do about staffing the new administration. And then he just says, you're going to drop the charges against me. The only real precedent for something even remotely approaching this is that when he went into office last time, there was a case under the Civil Rights Act against the state of Texas on voting rights, where they were saying that Texas had been violating folks' voting rights based on the barriers they were creating to voting. And when Trump took office and you had Sessions as Attorney General, they switched sides in the case, which is kind of incredible. Like when you think about it, I mean, it's literally like they brought the lawsuit in the first place. And then just imagine one of the parties just one day picks up their stuff and goes from the plaintiff's table to the defendant's table and says, well, now we're on this side of the case. And they started defending what Texas is doing. So that can absolutely happen. So that's why his whole game is run the clock until he can appoint the attorney general.
Yeah, it's a whole separate question of legal ethics, because if you were on the defense team in a criminal trial, you wouldn't be able to switch the prosecution or vice versa. Like that legal ethics would preclude that. It is actually really interesting that this even allowed.
But it's the United States versus. So the United States, if your client changes their position.
Yeah, that is wild. Well, okay. So one big thing to talk about here, Maggie Haberman, among others in the New York Times, had this long piece that went through a bunch of different sources. Trump's own words, words from his spokespeople, you know, interviews with people who are part of the campaign and part of his sort of shadow group, and basically pieced together, I think, a very clear picture of what the Trump presidency would look like and what 2025 would look like if Trump wins, based on the words of Trump and the people around him. And this is a pretty scary picture, Jason.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I guess first and foremost is that he's made it very clear that he's going to pursue political opponents and indict them. Like, he's not messing around. Like, he's going to instruct a Justice Department to indict Joe Biden, and I'm sure to try and do it in a jurisdiction, you know, where they're going to prevail and try and throw him in prison. Like, they might actually succeed. I mean, that could actually happen. I don't even think, look, if you're Joe Biden, that's the most frightening thing. But I think that, look, it's hard to even like talk about. I think that's the most frightening thing. But for us, for like the rest of us, to me, maybe one of the most frightening ideas in there is altering the civil service rules so that you can just put political appointees in every position. Because if you think about the first go around with the Trump administration, it was like I have close friends, and I'm sure you do too, who worked at the civil service level, high up at the civil service level in government, who, like, when they had crazy people who were the cabinet officials, they still were able to keep that in check. They called it the deep state. I think the rest of us would just refer to it as like people trying to govern by not refusing to do what they wanted, but like, you know, continuing to do their basic job and bringing the expertise that they had to it. And then advising the people at the top, like, why you may not want to do that thing the president's asking you to do. And in many cases, prevailing upon them to not do the thing that the president is asking them to do. But that's not what they're doing the second time around. The second time around, they know how to do this. And so now it's not, you know, in the past, it was something scary like Charlie Kirk or Joe Rogan to be the secretary of whatever. But what's scary about it now is that that's not what it is. I mean, sure, you might appoint one of those people to some position like that. But what's scary is that you're also appointing those people to all of the positions beneath it. So now you have nobody trying to make government do it. And you have them all coming from a movement that believes to their core that government has no good purpose to serve whatsoever other than it, you know, exacting revenge. And if you don't think government has anything good to do, then you're not going to penalize people for putting arsenic in water. You're not going to do any of those things because you'll have nobody dedicated to doing it. They'll all be so busy updating their Truth Social and their Twitter or X or whatever the hell. So.
It's one of those things that's really hard to explain to the average American because they will be like, oh, the president comes in, they appoint their own people. They don't know the nuances of a political appointee versus a lifer. And they also, like, it's one of those things in a world where people adhere to norms. It's the kind of thing that people would jostle over, like how many political appointees, how much power does the government have? And if the intentions are pure or at least okay, it's not as catastrophic as if, you know, you're trying to, you know, bulldoze, you know, every possible government employee who's telling you that you're breaking the law. And they've been explicit that they want to undo a lot of the Watergate era regulations that create independence for the most important questions like the rule of law and national security. And then there's like these, you know, they did a good job, I think, of outlining some of the strict policy proposals coming from Trump. And I think some of these dovetail with some of the stuff that he was ranting about on Christmas. So it does seem like there's a bit of a symmetry here. He wants to dramatically ramp up tariffs, which I actually think are fairly popular. The tariffs are. He wants to, you know, basically extend the trade war with China and ramp that up. Also pretty popular, even though the effects of it won't be, but that's not really what his concern at that point. And he'd be a second-term president.
Yeah, he's figuring that no one will assign the effects of it to him.
Yeah, which he's probably right.
Nor does he care. I mean, his whole, I've always said his whole governing philosophy is just get to tomorrow.
Yeah, he wants to do all sorts of draconian stuff on the border. He wants to use the military to police the border. Also probably popular, I would imagine. Like, so you go down through this list of policies that he has. A lot of them are like will be framed to the American people in ways that I actually think are going to be compelling. And that's why when he tucks into that something that's not that compelling, which is that he's going to use the machinery of government to go after his political enemies, he's banking on the fact that the right wing has done an effective enough job of saying that that's exactly what Joe Biden is doing, to say, all right, it's a wash. Trump's saying he's going to do it. Biden has done it already. The Democrats have done it. Therefore, we're going to evaluate people on strict policy terms, which, as absurd as it is, nobody thinks of Trump as a policy mind. The simplicity of what he's saying actually is going to be compelling to a lot of people. And the newness of it, like the short attention spans of the American public are such that they're like, oh, yeah, I'll try something new. Right? And so I do think that this is not crazy. Like the craziness is in the implementing it ethically is wrong and crazy, and a lot of this stuff will do permanent damage to the United States, if not eviscerate any sense of the rule of law that our country has and democratic norms. But I think from an electoral strategy perspective and an impunity perspective, he's probably on solid ground.
Yeah. And I think it's demonstrated by, Salty, you can go ahead and put up that graphic, as demonstrated by the fact that he's starting to believe that he's no longer in a desperate, I got to run so that I don't get convicted and thrown in prison thing. I think at this point, he thinks he's going to be president again, based on the fact that like he posted this word cloud that I don't remember who it was, did, not a friend of his did. And when they interviewed voters, I guess it was the Daily Mail interviewed voters, which I guess maybe would be a friend of his.
Might have been the Independent, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. But they interviewed.
Oh, the Daily
voters.
Mail. You're right. Yeah, it was the Daily Mail. Yeah.
And they asked, what were the top things that came to your mind when you thought of a new Trump presidency? And it's like revenge. I'm not sure that a lot of the people who said that meant it in a bad way.
Yeah.
They said things like dictatorship, dictator, corruption, and he posted that himself, which means, one, he absolutely envisions himself being a dictator, and two, he's feeling emboldened and he's feeling untouchable. And I think that is pretty frightening. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who are like, I don't know if I'm going to get invested in this election. I don't like Biden that much. And I don't like what he did about Israel. I don't like what he did about this. I don't like, you know what, come this time next year, you better get the hell over it. And I say that as somebody who has disagreed with a bunch of stuff that he's done. And because it's like that old analogy, like you're not trying to find a partner to marry. It's public transportation. Take the bus that's going to get you the closest to where you got to go. You're trying to get to, and that ain't Trump. It's Biden. So you better get out there and work.
Yeah, I'll say it again. I think that the possible scenarios in front of us as a country are absolutely crazy, and it's kind of weird because everybody's just kind of going on with their lives. So everybody's like, yeah, I'm like, I'm investing in my 401k and I'm, like getting that mortgage or whatever. And I'm like, it is weird that we have a roughly 50% chance, if we're being generous, of a dictatorship. Like that seems like we're not taking it seriously enough. Like, I know it's a crazy thing to say because Democrats, I think, are accused of, of hand wringing or saying the sky is falling or whatever, but I don't think people are alarmed enough. Like this, there's a significant chance that this is lights out for this experiment.
I choose to, at least for the time being, to remain optimistic that now that we're going into the actual election year, that people will engage some more. That's my hope. And as we get closer, more people will come home, on both sides, but that there's more of us than of them. And we will once again narrowly avoid that fate, but it's going to take a lot of work. So somehow let's now segue to one for us and talk about, our week. The last 4 days have been crazy for us. So we hosted Christmas. We're Jewish, but like everybody gets work off on Christmas. And it's a pretty secular holiday for a lot of people. So we hosted our family for Christmas for the first time. We've never hosted anybody at our house. That was kind of stressful. And then the next day, the 26th, I had dental surgery. And then it's the evening of the 27th right now. And then today, True he's 10 and he had surgery for the first time. He had his adenoids removed.
Everything good?
everything is good. He was super scared, but like,
What is an
he
adenoid?
never even had it. It sits up here at the top of your sinuses, and he has been like chronically congested for his entire life. Like he's never really been able to breathe through his nose, which makes the fact that he's like such a little athlete and he can run the mile in 7 minutes and just so much more incredible. He's like, he just sounds like permanently, he sounds like a person with a really bad sinus infection. And and so they looked and they saw that he was at 90% blocked up at the top of his nose. So they put him under, and he was real scared, but I mean, somehow he didn't cry. He like shook a little. I was really proud of him. I was really scared for him. But from his perspective, he fell asleep as they were rolling him into the into the operating room, and he woke up on his couch here at home today.
Wow.
And he's been eating and playing video games, and I got him and I Madden 24 for Christmas. So
Oh my God. I can only imagine how good that is. I think the last Madden I played was 98. So I can only imagine how good it's got.
It's ridiculous. All right. You're in Costa Rica.
I'm in Costa Rica with some common friends of the pod. Adisu Demessi is here. Mike and Liz Simon. This place it's great. I've been coming here now for 4 years since the middle of the pandemic, and been working mostly, but it was good to get away and good to plot this sort of escape from the U.S. Authoritarian regime of Trump when it has to come. So I'm building our bunkers so that we can record Majority 54 from a safe location in the future.
In exile. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll laugh with it.
I'll be like Fidel Castro in the mountains, like the Sierra Madre or whatever they were. Like that's what.
There's got to be a better analogy we can use.
Che Guevara.
Somebody who. We'll go with that. All right. Well, everybody, as we come to the end of the year, please feel free to leave a 5-star review on whatever you use to listen to this show. It helps more people find the show. You can find me on Instagram and everything else at Jason Kander. You can find Ravi at Ravi M. Gupta. Thank you to the Meidas Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today. Happy New Year.